Hello and welcome back to my studio art vlog. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please consider doing that, as well as art vlogs like this and insights into my studio day-to-day working as a professional artist. You will get art tips, art techniques, art business advice and social media training for artists. So what have I been doing this week? Well, I'll scoot through a few things that I've been working on. So I've been working a lot of admin and in particular I've been exhibition planning. So I'm in charge of running two large mixed exhibitions in which we show other artists' work this year. I'll tell you more about those another time. So this week I was mostly working on the Minories exhibition, and that one will be in August, and before that I've got the local art fair in July, which I am in charge of running. So I will, as I said, I'll talk about those another time, and I'll tell you how I sort of came to be in charge of this stuff and how I'm coping with the work that's involved, and actually how you run something this large. Other than that, I haven't been doing my normal weekly classes this week. We had a scheduled break, so instead I was teaching drawing at Tyndall's Art Shop in Colchester. So I have a course I run probably every 6 months or so called Improve Your Drawing, and it's a lot of perspective. We start off in the morning with a still life and we go on in the afternoon to drawing lots of buildings. So that's interesting stuff. Course went very well and people seem to react very positively to it. I always try and give people a lot of good value in my teaching. You know, I'm not one of these art teachers just going to wander around the class and say, oh, you know, that's very nice, because, you know, why would you pay money for that? So I like to teach people actual techniques, and we did run through lots of things like ellipses and buildings, and even just to give them a bit of a break so they could watch another demonstration. Wasn't really on the schedule, but I gave them a little bit of tuition in portrait drawing too, because drawing underpins everything really. It's so important. Now, the other thing I've been working on this week is a new painting. So I had been working on the little bird painting and it was almost finished, but I don't know, I wasn't feeling it. I've put it aside. There's nothing wrong with it. I've put it aside and I will finish it another time. But I often find actually when I work on these fairly small paintings, and by small I mean maybe 20 centimetres square, when I work on these kind of small paintings, I don't feel it in the same way as I work on larger paintings. Having said that, if you go too big, you're actually finding it physically difficult to get from one side of the paper to the other. I'm very small and I can't reach the top of the paper. And I find those very, very large paintings, which are maybe almost the size of a full sheet of watercolour paper, I find those don't sell very well because people just haven't got the room in their houses for them. So I've got kind of a sweet spot for paintings, which would be, for a square one is about 36, maybe I think it's 38 centimetres square, and then we've got kind of a portrait and a landscape version of the same, slightly bigger. So what I've been doing this week is working on a painting of Whitby Abbey. So Whitby is in North Yorkshire. Now Whitby is rather famous for being included in the Dracula book. So when Dracula's coffin is being brought to England on, I think it's the Demeter, on the ship, and everybody mysteriously dies, and then he gets shipwrecked and Dracula's coffin is washed ashore, I believe. I haven't read it for a while. It's one of my favourite books, but I haven't read it for a while. I believe that's what happens, and that all happens in the bay at Whitby. And I believe that Bram Stoker actually wrote at least part of the book while staying in Whitby, and one of the reasons for that is it's really spooky. It's got this amazing coastline and it's got a ruined abbey. So here is a photograph of the abbey at sunset, which I took a couple of years ago when I was staying up there. So you can see what a fabulous thing it is for a horror movie. You know, lots of movies have been set there. It's very much beloved by the Gothic community, and I believe they have like a Gothic festival one weekend a year. I think it's in October. Wouldn't be in the summer, was it? You know, you can have your Goths in shorts and flip-flops, really. I'd love to see that. Haven't seen it so far. I've always been up sort of in warmer weather. And I think last time I was up in late spring. So I'm going to tip the camera down and I'm going to show you the painting that I'm working on. It will get a little bit more shaky because I need to hold it freehand really, so I can move the camera around the painting and show you all the little bits and the techniques and the colours that I'm using. So here we are looking down at the original photograph, and I'm going to show you the painting I'm making. Now, I decided, really, I'm a big horror movie fan, and I decided this painting needed something a little bit spooky in it. Now, you know, much as I'd love to draw sort of Dracula and rivers of blood, might actually not be very saleable, and you know, I've got a mortgage to pay and bills to pay, so I thought instead I'd go for a bird, and obviously it's going to be one of these sort of the dark birds. I think this one's a crow. So I found a source photo on the internet, messed around with it a bit, flipped it and whatnot, and here we have the crow. So the painting is about halfway through at the moment, maybe a little bit further, and you can see I've drawn the abbey up here. I changed the perspective a bit, brought it forward a little bit. I've also made a sunset has been started here. Now, if you're interested in this particular technique of getting a sun or a moon up in an evening sky, I've actually done a separate video on that, so you can have a look at that. Down here I've been working wet into wet and also using some watercolor pencil. Down here we've got the river and we've got the bird. Now, in the original painting the grass here is very dark, but you have to consider tonal contrast and light and dark. Now, if I do the grass dark and later on I do the bird dark, he's not going to show up. So I purposely have lightened the grass. I mean, it may go darker than this, but I've got that option later on. You always want to work light to dark, so he'll be almost the last thing that goes in. And then we've got these rocks here. Now, on the rocks I've been putting some salt on the paint while it's wet, which makes these lovely kind of lichen type marks. It doesn't always work as well as this. It's worked amazingly well. I've got to rub the salt off. Obviously when it's dry that'll just brush off. Now I think actually it's kind of a bit too bright, it's a bit too in your face. So this front rock at least I'll be darkening part of it. I'll keep this bit up here light, and you see I want this part of the rock at the top light. That's where the light would naturally hit it, and then I've got the one behind darker. So you're always looking at throwing light against dark, and if you've got darks and shadows you always want to put them on the thing that's behind or at the base, and that way you'll get sort of proper three-dimensional stuff happening. I'm also going to put some shadow reflections in the water. I'll be using something called gum arabic to do that, so maybe I'll do you a little tutorial on that. Gum arabic actually dries shiny, and it delays the drying time. So instead of having sort of 30 seconds to get your shadows in before it's all drying, it gives you maybe 5-10 minutes. So I'll do you a little tutorial on that perhaps sometime. It's a fantastic way of adding complex shadows to water. Now, the other thing I've done is I've written my colours along the side here. So I'm using quite a limited palette for this. I often use maybe 3, sometimes 4 colours for a sunset. In this one I'm going into a 4th colour, and that's because the first 4 colours I used, there's not a very dark staining colour there, and I need to get that bird nice and dark. So I'm going to add Payne's Grey. Other than that I could have perhaps done without it. So the colours I've chosen, I started with Cobalt Violet, that's SAA colour. That's kind of a pinky lilac. It's a great colour actually, I'm very fond of it. I added some Daniel Smith Manganese Blue, which I've popped into the top there. And also having the blue enables me to mix my greens. Now the yellow I chose, generally for sunsets you want a warm yellow. I didn't want to go too orange here, I wanted to be able to mix lots of colours from this. So I've gone for a cadmium yellow light, and that would be a Talon's Rembrandt colour. These are all tube colours. I've also had a Quinacridone Pink. Quinacridone just denotes that it's a synthetic colour, not a natural pigment. So Quinacridone Pink is probably, if you imagine a permanent rose, Quinacridone Pink would just be a little bit bluer, so it's a little bit more Barbie, but nowhere near as bright as Opera Pink. So it's a colour that I'm very fond of. It's very useful, especially for things like skin tones. And then, as I said, I added the Payne's Grey. Now, Payne's Grey has got a lot of blue pigment in it, and this enables me to add it to lots of things and to mix from it. So I can mix greens, I can mix deep purples from it. And you can see I've also got some browns here, but these have all been mixed from those initial colours. So when you have got, when you've got primary colours, so when you've got a red, and we would include pink in that, when you've got a red, a blue and a yellow, you can mix greys and browns. Again, I'll do some more colour mixing stuff on this channel at another time. I think I'll just show you briefly before I finish this how I lay out my palettes. I've actually got 4 palettes at the moment. I started working with a very limited colour palette of about 10 colours, and I would suggest that that's the way you start. I've got recommended starter colours on my website, So initially I didn't have any secondary colours like green, but as I've gone on and done illustration work, it's sometimes handy to have a ready mixed colour that you don't have to worry is going to change every time you use it. So I've got my greens and my yellows in this palette. So this is the yellow that I chose, and you can see it's just a bit warmer than the yellow, than the lemon yellow. Tripping over my teeth here. So it's a bit warmer than the lemon yellow, and lemon tends to be rather greenish, so it's not always that useful in sunsets. Up here I've got some blues. So this is cerulean. It's not coming out on the camera anything like it is in real life. It's a lot more sort of aqua than that. And this, although it looks similar, is the manganese blue. So manganese is a bit like cerulean, but without the granulation. It's much more staining and much more transparent. So it's a Daniel Smith colour, and it's a really, really useful colour. Up here I've got sort of oranges, reds and pinks. So this first colour here is rather mucky colour, although again it's not, the colours are not being true on the screen, but that's kind of like it. So that is Potter's Pink. It's rather opaque and muddy. This next one up is my Quinacridone Rose, and you can actually see it diluted here. It's sort of this bluey pink, so very useful colour, and I have just dipped my finger in the paint. Okay, so that's where I am at the moment with this painting. I'm fairly quick at painting. I mean, I say quick, this painting overall will probably take me between 10 and 15 hours. I sometimes, if I'm doing botanical work, would go up to 30 or 40 hours on that. And if it was a very, very simple landscape, it might go down to 7 or 8 hours. But I am not a quick or a loose painter. I've got this kind of rather stylized approach to painting. And to be honest, I have tried to paint loosely. It's not me, it's not what I'm about. It may be more popular, but I just can't do it. And at the end of the day, you really have to embrace your own style, because you just can't force yourself to be anyone else. And whatever your style is, whether that's loose or whether that's fairly precise, there's no right or wrong way to be a painter. You know, embrace what you have and make the most of it. So I've actually allowed myself to be a little bit more stylized in my recent work, because it's just how I like to work. You know, it's just the way I see the world. I'm very much about colour mixing and patterns. So I hope you've enjoyed seeing that picture, and hopefully next week when I show it to you, it will be finished. So I'd love you to subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, and you can watch another video right now.